بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين. Okay, so Isra did the introduction and I'll hand the mic off to Ustad Mustafa, who will be discussing Islam in our modern world, our challenges and hopes.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, sisters and brothers. And Imam Zia, thank you for welcoming me to your beautiful community, MakeSpace. I've heard about this before in our common conversations at Foreign Service Institute when you were explaining it to US diplomats. And the word MakeSpace come from the ayah in the Quran and about it. What a beautiful idea and really beautiful community. Thank you for welcoming me. And I love these chairs. Where do you get them? It's so nice. I mean, I've never seen this before. Very nice.
Made in China.
Made in China. They run the world these days, yeah. That's why we should not have tariffs and trade barriers and all that. There should be free trade. We should get these and sell them. Things too. I should tell a little bit about who I am, maybe. And I am not an American. Working on it. Got a green card a while ago. But I'm from Turkey. I'm Turkish. I was born in Ankara, raised in Istanbul, and much of my life I was in Turkey. I was a newspaper opinion writer, lecturer at a university. 7 years ago, I moved to DC from Istanbul. I got a better position, for a job at Cato, for Cato Institute. Cato is a libertarian think tank, so it defends liberty, freedom of ideas, markets, people, migrants, a lot of, I think, perspectives there. I don't define myself as libertarian on every particular issue in America, but I do value the liberal tradition, and I'll try to explain what that means as a Muslim and from an Islamic point of view. To some people, this might be a little bit, what is he talking about? But I'll try to explain what I mean by that. First of all, I should tell maybe a bit more myself. As I said, I grew up in Turkey. I didn't go to madrasa or traditional Islamic education. I didn't get that, but I went to modern secular school, actually American school in Istanbul, Boğaziçi University. But in college years, I became a born-again Muslim. I tell people, I became more intensely religious, joined the Jamaat, a community. We were very focused on the Quran and reading Quran in the light of the modern age, and that was our motto. And Turkey was at the time, this was in the 90s, so I'm not very young. And several things kind of brought me to my kind of upbringing in my worldview, I should say. One was the Bosnian genocide, which happened in those years, which, just like Gaza in the past year, deeply touched me, pained me, seeing people being killed because they are Muslims. If you're a Turk, it pains double because we had the sense that we left them behind and they're killing them now, right? I mean, the Serbian fascists, ultranationalists. So that was actually a trigger for the bigger Islamic movement in Turkey, and I was, in my college years, very deeply influenced by that. The second thing is Turkey was, in the 90s, under this heavy secularist regime. Now, I make distinctions between a liberal secularism and an illiberal authoritarian secularism, and I'll come to that. But Turkey got all the terrible ideas from the West and made them even worse. Sometimes we do that. We got secularism from all places, from France, laïcité. In Turkish, it's called laiklik. And even it turned more oppressive than France. I mean, in the 90s, the Turkish military, which was imposing laïcité, laiklik, on elected politicians, they banned the hijab in the universities. You couldn't wear hijab and enter a campus in Turkey. And I was very agitated against that. And we defended the right to wear a hijab, against the secular establishment. And I was in college, but then I was started to write about these things, first pamphlets and so on and so forth. Gradually, after college, I became a writer in Turkey, a journalist. I became an opinion writer, and it went like that. But now one thing I noticed in Turkey was that the right to wear a hijab was defended by two different kinds of people. One was, of course, Turkey's pious conservative Muslims, right? I mean, this is Allah's hukum, how dare you ban it? I mean, this is zulm, and you obviously other kind of people were not very pious Muslims. They were Turkey's liberals. They were different from the secularists. The secularists wanted to dictate non-hijab, and they said, you cannot dictate on people what they will wear. They have an individual, have a right to choose what they will wear. The state cannot impose on them. They quoted figures like John Locke or some Western thinkers and so on and so forth. That made me interested in political liberalism, and I gradually accepted the idea that the government should not tell people how to live, and a Muslim lady should be able to wear a hijab, a niqab, or whatever her religious practice is. Like an Orthodox Jew should do whatever they want and whatever the tradition tells them, and so on and so forth. But then also in the 90s, there was the Taliban in Afghanistan, and they were forcing hijab, right? I mean, so that should be wrong too. But what does our tradition say? What does our Islamic fiqh jurisprudence say? I mean, grappling with these issues, and with my understanding of the Quran, rereading the Quran in the light of the modern age, my convictions about re-understanding Islam in the modern era and these political issues brought me to embrace what I call Islamic liberalism, which is an idea that means, as pious Muslims, what kind of a political order do we want? Do we want a khilafah? Do we want a sultanate that is enforcing Islam? Now, a lot of people will say, yes, that's what it is. That's what, Caliph Umar did, that's what Caliph Abu Bakr did, and so on and so forth. And I tell them, if I lived at the time, I would do that, yes, but we don't have anyone like that anymore. I mean, who represents Islam today? And now, interestingly, in Turkey, these issues were not just discussed at my time, but in the late Ottoman Empire as well. I valued the late Ottoman experience very much, called Tanzimat in Turkish terms, and Arabic, of course, Tanzimat. The Ottomans, of course, we know were this great superpower of the Ummah, right? The Muslim one. It was the superpower of the world. I mean, in the 16th century, basically. Europeans were scared. The Ottomans would come and take over. We tried to take over Vienna twice, and unfortunately, we couldn't get it. But I'm kidding. But we left a memory, by the way. Do you know when the Ottomans besieged Vienna for the second time in 1683? That's the 1683 or 89, I can't forget. But second siege of Vienna, they tried to get it, they failed, and actually it was a big defeat. They had to rush back, so they left a lot of tents behind the military. And Ottomans were drinking coffee, and Europeans had no idea what coffee is at that moment. So they left the coffee beans, and the Austrians found those, and they heard that you cook them and you drink them, and they cooked it, and it tasted bitter. And then one of the monks said, "Let's try to mix with milk and sugar," and they liked it, And this monk was from the Capuchin order. It's a Catholic order. From that, you get your cappuccino. By the way. So Ottomans contributed a lot of things to Europe, and we did as Muslims to a lot of things to the West, of course. But the Ottomans realized that growingly in the 18th, 17th century, the West is more powerful, more organized, they have better armies, better weapon technologies, and how do we catch up with that? So that led to reforms. In the 19th century, this also led to political reforms. For example, in our classical Islamic fiqh, what's the relationship between Muslims and non-Muslims? Actually, it was very tolerant for 1,000 years, for medieval times. I mean, we allowed Jews and Christians to practice their religion under Islam, Ahl al-Kitab, the people of the book. That was a remarkably tolerant thing. That's why Jews escaped from Europe and came to Ottoman lands several times. The biggest one is from Spain, but there were also other Ashkenazi communities from Europe as well. This was the time when Christians were slaughtering Jews for being just Jews. So when people speak of the Judeo-Christian tradition today, well, it's more complicated than what they think, and there's actually an even more legitimate Judeo-Islamic tradition, which went on until the modern era, until the 20th century. But the point is, it was tolerant, but it was not equal. So we had more rights than Jews and Christians. A Christian and Jew could not be a witness against a Muslim in a court. They had to pay an extra tax called jizya. They could convert to Islam, but Muslims could not convert to their religion. That would be ridda, apostasy, and that would be a crime, and so on and so forth. So the Ottoman Empire grappled with these issues in the 19th century. Because you can defend these things when you are the powerful, maybe. But if you're not powerful and you're still defending these things, actually you need equality, right? This is like, let's be all equal. I mean, so when you're a minority, you start to look at the world from a different point of view, right? I think in the West, we Muslims see this. Like, for example, thank God we can practice our religion in America freely. There are Islamophobes, there are bigots, but it's not the law. At least not so far. Inshallah, it's gonna stay like that, but we'll see. We can give da'wah, people can convert to Islam, right? We can distribute the Quran. We have freedom of speech, freedom of religion. These are good values. If these are good values, should we also have the exact same values in our Muslim majority lands? Should we have similar freedom of speech and religion in Saudi Arabia or Afghanistan or Iran? We had a conversation about this Sheikh Yasir Qadhi. I mean, it's all online, you can see. We disrespectfully disagreed on that, but I say yes, we should have these values in our Muslim lands too, so we need those political reforms and changes. Now, to say no can come from the conviction that no, Islam has already given us what we should have on every issue, right? So, Khilafah is what Islam requires as a political system. Now, that's why I have, worked on these issues, worked with the people who work on these issues, studied their works, popularized them. There's a way of understanding our Islamic tradition with a deeper sense of history and context. Even understanding the hukum, the judgment on a certain issue in a more contextual way. Now, let me try to explain with one example what this means. We will be familiar with certain hadith that says a Muslim woman should not travel without a mahram, with a male guardian, for a distance of 3 days or 1 day. There are a few versions on that. You can find in Sahih Bukhari and other sources. Now, based on this hadith, we have jurisprudence which says, Muslim women should not travel alone. Right? Now, I respect the people who give the fatwa and follow the fatwa willingly. But of course, when you also establish an Islamic Emirates, like in Afghanistan, you can enforce this too, right? So the Taliban says, you cannot leave Kabul and go somewhere as a woman, and that's the least of they impose, they of course impose. Now, for example, Taliban also believes music is haram, and I have a good solution to that. Good, then don't listen to music, but they don't want nobody to want to listen to music. So there's an enforcement problem there in both their fiqh. But on this issue, for example, there's another way of looking at this hadith, which is, at the time of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, women traveling alone between Mecca and Medina, that they would be prey to bandits. It's just nobody would travel alone. You need the protection. It's a dangerous environment. You cannot go, women do not carry swords and protect themselves. So the hikmah behind this, the wisdom behind this, is security. Women should be protected because they can be targets of. Now, but today, traveling a distance of 3 days, you can get on a plane here and land in Jakarta, probably you'll be safe. So it's not. So that is one way of looking at that. So looking at the intention behind the thing. So that is a point of view which has roots in our Islamic tradition, of course, the maqasid approach to the Sharia, which has not been emphasized that much until the modern era, which is growingly more emphasized. And I think we need that. There's a good reason, because we are very distant from the context in which our religious tradition developed. 100 years ago, maybe the context was still the same, but today we are in such a different world. Our understanding of jihad, developed at a time when war is the normal human condition. Everybody wages war, like peace is exceptional. Islamic scholars lived at a time, so they said this is Darul Harb, about a war. Because everybody's making war, they're killing each other too. But now, in a world of United Nations, international law, which is violated a lot these days by the very country which supposedly protects it, but we'll speak about US foreign policy separately. But still, it's not there are agreements between countries, so that's a different world. And 1,000 years ago, a Muslim could not imagine living in, where are we? Are we in Alexandria? Living in a place called Alexandria, Virginia, and having a total safe and protected life, freer than even some of your Muslim majority countries and so on. So that's why they consider Darul Harb and Darul Islam, but today that category doesn't make sense, right? We respect those scholars, but live in a different world. 1,000 years ago, a Muslim could not imagine living under something other than the Sharia and finding justice, because their laws are against us. They will kill us just for being Muslim. What's the alternative? The Crusaders and the Mongols both come and slaughter you. So that's the world that it is. So there's a jurisprudence developed in those conditions. We respect all the scholars. If they lived today, maybe they would give different fatwas on certain issues. So there is a way of looking into our religious texts, the Quran, the Hadith, and of course, Quran has a special status as revelation. I deeply believe in that. But even there, the Quran makes some changes in Arab urf, which is there, right? So there's a contextuality to there too. So scholars like, for example, Fazlur Rahman, which is from Pakistan, lived in the US and taught at the University of Chicago, has this going back to the judgment and trying to understand the intention and the context and bringing here the intention approach. So I've written a lot about that and trying to apply it to some conditions today. When we do that, we come to this conclusion that not everything that is written in our religious tradition, as tradition, is eternally binding. What is eternally binding about Islam is our faith, ibadah, our worship, our ethics, but political systems, political ideas can change. And the very good example of this is the tradition itself. For example, for 1,000 years, Muslim scholars said, obey the ruler, right? Especially in the Sunni tradition. How does the ruler come to power? Does he get elected in 4 years, in 6 years? Is he a prime minister? Is he the ruler? And they came in a hereditary succession from the Umayyads to the Ottoman Empire. And nobody asks why it's a hereditary succession. That was the world that they know, and that became a part of it. They emphasize that the ruler must be just. But how do you choose a ruler? This is a modern idea. It's called democracy. They didn't think about it, but we can today think about it. If it's a working system, if it is efficient, it's a good way to get rid of rulers in every 4 years if they're bad. It's better than having the Bashar Assads and Sisis and all the dictators that we have in the Muslim world. So now this is a difficult question because some of these modern liberal ideas are coming to us, to the Muslim world from the West, which sometimes is, not sometimes, but the past 200 years, is the colonial power that has occupied our lands, still launching colonial wars and aggressions and so on and so forth, and hurting our communities. But I think there are a few nuances about that we should see. First of all, of course, the one that targets us not just the West, but Russia. We know this very well from Afghanistan and Central Asia and all that. So there are many foreign powers that actually can be threatening to Muslims. Sometimes the West can be helping us against some of those aggressions. Uyghurs, I think, would agree with that these days regarding China. Bosnians. One thing actually in the 90s is that I was so motivated against Serbian fascists. I appreciated the fact that the U.S. bombed Serbian fascists, even belatedly, so not every U.S. intervention has been bad for us, but some are. Second, one thing is that the political system of a country and its foreign policy could be two different things. You can appreciate rule of law in a country, but its foreign policy can, and I think we see this clearly in America. Today, a lot of Muslims say, well, I'm happy with the rule of law and justice and freedom, democracy I find in America. But what it's doing in the Middle East is, many Americans themselves are saying this, right? So we should, because foreign policy is influenced by power groups, lobbies, all the different interests and zealotries, that influences this thing. Second, the West is not monolithic. For example, in the past year, we've seen Ireland standing up for Palestinians. We've seen countries like Norway, Spain, taking much more nuanced and humane and I think just positions. Third, in the West, you have something that you don't have in Russia or China, let alone Saudi Arabia, honestly. You can try to change the government's policy as a citizen, as a group. You can criticize it. You have a voting right. You can try to influence. You can build up, and I think that's why we American Muslims, Western Muslims, have a role. Maybe we can actually say something to those societies by appreciating what is good, by appreciating the rights, opportunities, freedoms, and democracies, but also saying, well, this is wrong. What you're doing is wrong, and because other people have been saying, do this, right? I mean, based on their perspectives and their stories, but we have another story to share. I think that's how we can look at the foreign policy issue. So these are some of the things I've been writing about, trying to open up conversations. I'm not a mufti, I'm not an imam, I'm not a sheikh, I'm not giving anyone any verdict. I'm actually reminding people that our ulama gave already, right? That you find in the writings of someone that is something very interesting, but we did not pay attention that much. In the Hanafi tradition, the very early Hanafi tradition, there's a great emphasis on rationality and ray, and making religious verdicts based on istihsan, that's the rational consideration of what's good and bad. In the Ottoman tradition, there are a lot of things I keep learning from other scholars as well. So these are some of the issues I'm writing. Also, you see books here titled Islamic Jesus and Islamic Moses. These are the two books I wrote about how Islam is connected to Judaism and Christianity. Of course, these are our prophets. Both are deeply revered. But how our understanding compares to the Jewish and Christian understanding. What are differences, but also some similarities. In Islamic Jesus, for example, I tried to show how our understanding of Christ was present in Christianity, in some of the very early sects, which turned out to be heretics. We would not see them heretics, but very interesting connections there. And in the Islamic Moses, which just got published a few months ago, actually, it starts with the Quranic. Very interesting that in the whole Quran, the most dominant, the most frequently quoted and narrated prophet is Moses, by far, more than anyone else. Like his name is mentioned 137 times. Do you know who is second after Moses? Who's most mentioned? Most second mentioned being? Sorry? Maryam is not, yes, she's prominent, but it's not Maryam. Ibrahim is the third, actually, from the wrong.
Yusuf?
Not Yusuf, but good guess, yes. The most second mentioned human after Moses is the Pharaoh. The enemy of Moses, right? Well, not a good human, but a human, right? Not a person we like. So because Moses standing up to the Pharaoh and defending the believers, Israelis at the time, and from his oppression, is told and retold in the Quran, the most dominant story. And I believe one reason God gave that story and retold that to the early Muslims in Mecca is they identified with that. They were under persecution in Mecca. Actually, there's a hadith which says Abu Jahl is the Fir'aun of this ummah. So Muslims, when they were reading the Moses and Israelites and God saving them through an Exodus story, they were seeing their own, and it's not an accident that those are narrated in the Meccan surahs mostly. So they had their Exodus, we had our Hijrah. Then, of course, then things got different in Medina. Muslims were saved from persecution, in that sense. But I begin with that story in the Islamic Moses and then tell the actually similarities between Islam and Judaism. Actually, theologically, we don't have a problem with Judaism. We don't have a tension with Judaism. Like Christianity, there's a tension, theological tension, with all the respect to our Christian friends. Like, divinity of Christ, that we don't accept that. You know, the Quran takes a strong position about that. There's a difference there. With actually Judaism, Muslims don't have a religious tension. There are actually Jewish scholars, which I mentioned, like who said Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, is a real prophet, just not for Jews, but for the Gentiles. That they should all follow Muhammad because he brought them monotheism. There are Jewish scholars who said this in history. So there's no, and we didn't have a problem with Jewish communities until the 20th century with the Zionist project and the conflict that it created, and which still which still is going on in a very terrible phase of it right now. But I think the book Islamic Moses reminds the better history between Muslims and Jews, telling that we were actually friends, and it's not a religious war, and we can end this conflict based on justice, based on mutual understanding and respect. And a lot of people, unfortunately, try to depict this as an unresolvable conflict because Muslims hate us. Right? Muslims didn't hate Jews. I mean, there's no anti-Semitism problem in our history. So, but the book also tells a lot of episodes about that and how actually Muslims, and anti-Semitism is mainly a European problem, not a Muslim problem. And the book has many episodes reminding people those things. Yeah, so these are some of the issues I'm writing about. Now I'm working on a new project on the historical interpretations of the Quranic phrase "La ikraha fi Deen," or no compulsion in religion. Now that's a very powerful verse. I think there's no scripture which says that there is no compulsion in religion. It has been a blessing for millions of people in world history because thanks to that verse, and of course others, Muslims refrained from forcibly converting Jews and Christians to Islam. This was an amazing thing. Like you conquer people, still allow them to do their religion. This was like an amazing thing. Actually, at some point, Ottoman Sultan Yavuz Selim, he was a heavy-handed sultan. He considered converting Christians in the Ottoman Empire forcibly into Islam. He said the empire will be more stable. Let's just make them all Muslims. His Shaykhul Islam said, you cannot do this. This is against the Sharia, right? So we have this tradition of Sharia constraining the rulers and based on Quranic precepts such as La ikraha fi Deen verse. But does this verse also mean the Taliban should not be imposing its fiqh on us? Does it mean that people can become Muslim but also maybe convert to another religion? Not that we want that, not that we encourage that, but do we consider it as a crime? So we will have we study on the historical tafsir traditions on La ikraha fi Deen, and there are very interesting actually approaches in Ottoman traditions, in other traditions as well. So it will be a joint work of scholars from Pakistan, Morocco. In Morocco there are Ramadan laws, and there are Ahmed al-Raisuni, a Moroccan scholar, criticized these Ramadan laws, saying that we're fasting for God, why do we need the government to engage in the laws? I mean, so there are angles like that, and I think one problem we should solve today is, in the Muslim world, is there is a tendency to make people better Muslims by using some coercion, like the government having some laws, or the parents sometimes beating their kids a little bit, and so on and so forth. Now, I don't think that is really based on our Nas, that is revealed text, that's not in the Quran. I think that's built in culture and so on and so forth. Now, that's wrong in principle. Moreover, it's backfiring. It is proving counterproductive. One thing I've seen, I tell people a lot, is that today the most viciously anti-Islam murtads, apostates, that I've seen, many of them come from Iran. Mm-hmm. Guess why? I once, I noticed this 15 years ago. I was in Boston at a conference, and I entered a taxi, and the guy's name was Abdullah, and I said, "Oh, assalamu alaikum, brother. I'm Mustafa. I'm from Turkey. Where are you?" He said, "Alaikum salam, but I don't like the language or something." He said, "I said, why?" He says, "I'm not a Muslim." I said, "Okay, well, your name is Abdullah. I respect that, but yeah, I left it all that. I said, okay, I mean, why? If you want to tell me, I'll be happy to listen to your story. He said, Islam killed my father, imprisoned my uncle. And I listened to him, and I was, what is Islam he's talking about? Oh, he's speaking of the Islamic Republic of Iran. But he identifies religion with the regime. So when you establish a regime through, try to establish religion through a regime, you actually don't make people more pious. You actually cause people go away from religion. You cause hypocrisy too. A lot of people, secretly do alcohol and so on and so forth. So I think we need more freedom, including freedom on religious matters in Muslim majority societies. And the problems are coming from historical interpretations of our religion rather than the core of our religion. Now, that's a big statement which needs a lot of backing. That's why a lot of work on this is going on, and I'm trying to contribute or advance those ideas. So that's why I have a book, Why as a Muslim I Defend Liberty, or the Reopening Muslim Minds book is about some of these insights in our tradition that we forgot or didn't pay much attention, from Ibn Rushd to some early scholars. And the other two books are on Islam's connection to the Jewish and Christian traditions through the personas of the prophets, Musa and Isa alayhi salam. So I spoke too much, I think, so I should. But thank you. I can stop here if you want, and any conversation, any question, any objection, I'll be happy to hear.